Hello and welcome to BCOM Chapter 11, titled Organizing and Preparing Reports and Proposals. In this chapter, we're going to be looking at formal reports and also short reports, and then a brief look at proposals. Let's begin by looking at the parts of a formal report. We'll first of all look at the preliminary material in a report, then we'll look at the body or the report text itself, and then we'll take a look at the addendum or the additional material that comes at the end of the report. First of all, the preliminary material of a formal report. We begin with the title page, and we have a book that we use, APA, the easy way, that will show you very clearly how to create a title page in APA. As well as the title page, we have a table of contents and a table of figures. And we'll talk just a little bit more about that. Formal reports also may have an executive summary, or if it's done for academia, we call it an abstract. In the body or the report text itself, we have a number of different sections. First of all, we have an introduction. Of course, this follows the Greek concept of good communication, with having an introduction and then a body and then a conclusion. So in the introduction of the report, what we're trying to do is to introduce and begin to define the topic of our report. We also take a look at the scope, what we're going to talk about in our report, and any limitations or issues that we've had in preparing our paper. We're going to talk about the sources of information, where we got our information from and how strong our report is based upon expert testimony or proofs or evidence within the material. We're also going to talk about definitions or terminology that we're going to use specific to this report, and then a preview of the basic structure or the major sections. All of that's included within the introduction. Then we move upon the body of the paper, in which we have the main points and the basic information of the report itself. From that, we move to the final analysis of the material. We talk about what the information means and a suggested response or a call to action. These are all involved in the body of the report. The third part of the report itself, after the introductory preliminary material and then the body of the report, the third part is the appendix or the addenda. Part of the addenda is the appendix itself, in which we are providing supplementary material that lend extra material and information that is really not appropriate to be putting into the text. Usually this is, in terms of graphics, it would be a lot of information, a lot of graphs and tables that would take up extra space in the report itself and make it more difficult for the reader to read through the report very quickly and very easily. So we place that material into the appendix at the back of the paper. We also have at the end of the paper our references or the sources and how the reader may find the sources of information that we have used. And then some reports also have an index in which they talk about how to find specific topics within the report itself. Now that we've talked about the different parts of a report, we want to talk about the preparation of the report, which really involves two different topics. First of all, outlining, and secondly, writing style. When we talk about outlining, what we're trying to do is respond to two questions. First of all, why do we outline? And secondly, how do we outline? The why of the outline has to do with planning the paper. When we prepare an outline, we're actually planning the paper step by step, almost page by page, but certainly idea by idea. Thus, we may modify our outline when we continue the writing process. Many times I've created an outline, and then as I've continued my research and then begun my writing, I've changed my outline to adjust it to new information or the new structure or way that I want to present that information. So that's why we do the outline. The question then remains, how do we do an outline? Basically, an outline is a subordination of ideas. If we can subordinate ideas and say this idea supports that idea and that idea supports this idea, any way we can put the material together in an order, in a structure, in a planned way that makes sense, we are creating an outline of the information itself. It begins very simply by, first of all, understanding all of the information. We do our research, and then we take our research and we sit back and say, okay, I have learned these things about my particular topic. What we do then, after we come to a good understanding of the material following our research, is to create 2, 3, or 4 different categories of ideas that we can put all of our information in, and it fits within 2, 3, or 4 different categories. Then after we have these 2 to 4 categories, we take one category at a time, and we say, this is the bulk of my information. How can I divide this information or subordinate this information into 2 or 3 or 4 subcategories? And we do the subcategories for each of our main categories, and all of a sudden we find that we're at a 2-level outline. We have the main categories as our first level, we have the subcategories as our second level, and then we take a look at our subcategories and we begin saying, now, what information fits into these? And these are our supporting points. So at that point we have a 3-level outline: main categories, subcategories, supporting points. And we continue this process until all of the information that we have learned in our research fits into an organization and a pattern that is an outline of subordinated ideas for presenting our information. We also use APA headings, and if you'll see that information in our book, APA the Easy Way, on page 6 in the lower left-hand corner. We use headings to help us illustrate our outline, right in this page right here. So our main categories would be right here. This is the first level heading. Our supporting categories would be at the second level, and then our subcategories should be here, and then our supporting points would be at the third level. Now that we've discussed outlining, we take a look at our writing style, how we want to place our words and our ideas together. And there are a few tips that our textbook talks about in this section, page 180 to 182. The first tip that I will talk about now is to avoid first-person pronouns. Basically what I'm talking about is talking in the first person, talking about me. I believe this, I think that, I suggest this, I'm going to talk about this now. To eliminate the word I in our writing, to eliminate that first-person pronoun, is to create text and writing that is much more objective and much more credible to the reader. Otherwise, the reader says, well, how do I know that this author, who keeps talking about him or herself, knows that much about the material? What we want to do is to objectify our writing and talk about him or her or they. So we talk about more objective pronoun discussion about people instead of just all about me. Avoid first-person pronouns if at all possible. And if you've been writing this way, this will strengthen your writing by going back and eliminating that I that you find every few sentences or paragraphs. The second tip is to use the active voice. Now I suggest you take a look in your BCOM book back to page 58 and review the concept of active and passive voices. The active voice is basically where the subject is the doer of the process. And you want to talk about the subject being the doer because it creates a stronger language. It creates a better presence. It's a better way of communicating. It's not a weak language, an apathetic way of communicating what you're trying to say. It's actually taking strength in your language. So use the active voice and you'll make your language even stronger. Third, I would suggest be very consistent with your tense. If you're going to write a paragraph in the future tense, you want the whole paragraph to be about future tense. And avoid going from future tense to past tense to present tense. The more you can do that, the less you will confuse your writer. Now, it's okay to take one paragraph and be future tense in that, and another paragraph and be present tense in that. But when you're using different tenses within the same paragraph, it can make it confusing for the reader. Another point is to use transitions between your main categories or your subcategories. So what we do is talk about, in terms of tenses, we talk about a review of what we've been talking about and transition by reviewing. We also use the present tense to talk about where we are now, and we talk about the future tense as a preview for what's coming. So for example, from one main category to another main category, we could use a review, a present tense, or a preview. For example, moving from one point to another, we can say, we've been talking about this, and now we're going to discuss. Present tense would be to say, now for my second point, I'd like to talk about, and that's very present tense. In terms of a future tense or a preview, you might say, we're going to now discuss, and then you introduce the next topic. So you can also mix your transitions together. You can have a review and a preview. So for example, when you move from one category to another, you can say, we've been talking about these 3 items. Now what we're going to do is look at 4 more items that relate to this. You see, I've talked about what we did talk about and what we're going to talk about. Or you could put them in any other combination you want. Talk about what you've been discussing. Now for our third point, we're going to discuss such and so, and that involves these 3 items. So I've used all 3 transitions at that point. Using transitions between your main points will help bind your content and your ideas together. You will also want to document the sources that you use in your report, and this will lend credibility. You see, all of a sudden when you document your ideas, you're offering proof, you're offering evidence to what you're saying. These are not just your ideas anymore. These are not just your opinions. These are the ideas of people who are experts. They've written a book, or they've written an article, or they've done a documentary on the television, or you've interviewed them from their experience. Now when you document that you got information from other sources, all of a sudden your report becomes much more credible, much more believable than your own ideas and your own opinions. Please take a look at page 180 to 182 for additional ideas on strengthening your writing style. And so we've been talking about formal reports. I want to make a segue now to the last part of the chapter in which we talk about short reports and also proposals. Briefly, short reports have to do with the memorandum or email or letter reports that are frequently produced in business. These are a brief and a short summary of the kinds of materials that we've been looking at, but they follow different types. Proposals are another kind of report that many times are prepared. Basically, they follow the same format of a persuasive message, and you can read about this on page 189 to 193 in your textbook. But following the persuasive message format and structure that we've discussed before in the class, and also using the same kinds of report structure that we have discussed in this chapter already, proposals are prepared for different purposes. You have your internal proposals and your external proposals. Basically, it's a very simple understanding. An internal proposal is for a suggested route or suggested thing to do or a suggested way of doing business or purchasing an item within the organization. It's an internal proposal within the organization. An external proposal is outside the organization or to some other related company or related business that has to do with ours, but it's outside our organization, and so it's called an external proposal. You also have solicited and unsolicited proposals. A solicited is where you are requested to come up with a proposal. For example, if your boss comes to you and says, we want to buy a copy machine, would you please go out and research what copy machines are out there and how much they cost? That's a solicited proposal. You're writing a proposal because you've been asked to do it. But an unsolicited proposal is where you see the need for something within the organization, and so you write a proposal and present it to your boss and hope that your boss says, this is a good idea. I like the way you've done this, and then buys your proposal or purchases what you have recommended. Basically, this chapter 11 is talking about the formal reports, short reports, and also proposal. Take a good look at this chapter so that you have a clear understanding of all of the terms, definitions, and concepts, and we'll see you back here once again for another BCOM review.